Mr. Lincoln, tell me, what was going? Hey friends, Emoji C here. Curtis asked me to kick today's show off. We're going to start where it ends with three incredible women, the first ladies that I've had a chance to work with: Barbara Bush, Hillary Clinton, and the one and only Michelle Obama. Going to do a lot of Q&A today. Also prepare a beef Wellington for you. We're finishing up that cooking class I did for Sunrise Living. Enjoy the show. Good stories about Julia Child and Paul Prudhomme. Peace and spread.
Yep, that looked delicious. I'm going to make these afterwards as well.
So anyone watching us, what I'd love for you to do, if you've, like I said, if you've got questions, we will read them. We can do them now. If not, you can send them to me, chef@curtisaikens.net. And also remember what I said earlier, recipes are starting points. I'll never forget, I met Julia Child and Paul Prudhomme on the same day. I was working at a station in Atlanta, WXIA TV, where I got my start. Jack Leese was the program director there, and he just, for whatever reason, took a liking to me. And I did the show for the first time. I was promoting, well, the offshoot to this book. This book is Curtis Aikens' Guide to the Harvest, where a lot of my tips of buying fresh fruits and vegetables come from. So I was promoting the prelude to that book, and Jack had me on, and he liked this young guy with hair back then. So he invited me up to his office, and each week he would tell me what I did wrong, I did right. And he says, Curtis, this is back before we had all the cable, before the cable networks blew up, right? So there were, 3 standard stations plus the UHF stations. And he says, people are kind enough to allow us into their homes. So you need to respect that. I go, wow, that's pretty heavy when you think about it. You go, however, you're right. So every day, noonday was the show. Elise Wolfman was my first host. Then I worked with Jill Becker and some other great hosts in Atlanta, Georgia. And I got a chance to travel throughout the Southeast. I did shows in Augusta, GA, down in Tallahassee, Florida, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Nashville, all over the Southeast. And Elise and Jill Becker were so kind to me. They taught me these things like, we're in people's home, respect, just like Jack said. So I always wanted to be respectful when I was on your couch with you, because you were on the couch watching me. So therefore, we were on the couch with you. So I'm traveling one week. I'd been to, I think, Tampa, did a great show down there. A guy came, Murphy in the morning in Tampa, right? So I do these shows, and I got home late at night. So I said, okay, I got to do an easy recipe Thursday morning on noonday, Thursday at noonday, right? So I do this dish I love. It's an incredible dish called fresh pickle melons, cantaloupe, watermelon, honeydew, with a little vinegar, some sugar, and I add mint along with tarragon, and just toss it over. It has a fresh pickling effect and a little bit of sugar, right? Just to kind of cut that vinegar, okay? You don't have to use the sugar, especially like now as a diabetic with diabetes, I don't use the sugar. However, it helps to cut that acid in the vinegar. Okay, so setting it up. So the day I meet Julia, so I go to the show and I find out that Julia Child is going to be on the show. And I'm, wow, out of all the dishes I know to make, I'm making this little simple thing, right? You always want to impress somebody, right? They're making something extravagant. So she tasted it and just loved it. Now, I used to do a really good Julia impression. I don't know how it is now. Oh, Curtis, this is fantastic. I love this. And I'm like, oh, wow, thank you, Miss Child. Julia, please call me Julia. So every time I would say Miss Child, she would say, call me Julia. And I'm thinking, well, I'm a Southern boy. I can't call someone I respect this much by their first name. So she goes, no, call me Julia. So I finally said Julia to her. And, she set the tone for how my on television persona would be. Because the question I had for her was, Miss Child, Julia, please, should I go to culinary school? And she grabbed both my hands and she said, Curtis, with your passion for food and life, just I wound up joining, I still have my first year that I was with the International Association of Culinary Professionals. She encouraged me to join. If she saw me on a television show, she'd send a note. I'll never forget, she and I both were speaking at the IAC, International Culinary Association of Professionals in San Antonio, Texas, at the same time. And I'm thinking no one's going to come to my presentation because they're going to all be with the queen, right? And it's funny, I had a pretty good turnout. I think I did get all the overflow. So our presentation left about the same, or ended about the same time. So I'm coming out of my room, she's coming out of hers, and it's like she sees me and she walks over. I'm kind of thinking, okay, and she gives me this hug. So it's like my ticket in the culinary world was punched. Last story about Julia, and then we're going to get on to the next recipe. If you get to Washington, D.C., please visit the Smithsonian Institute, also the African American History Museum, visit that. Go to Julia's kitchen, and you're going to see a picture of a young Curtis George Aikens Sr. in her kitchen. I'm very proud of that, that she thought the people that put it together, and I'm sure Miss Child, Julia, had some influence on what was going to happen later on. For her 90th birthday, this was one of the highlights of my career, and it still is when it comes to just the culinary part. I got to host one of her 90th birthday parties. I hosted the dinner in Baltimore, and of course, Julia was out here on the West Coast with Paul Prudhomme and Robert Mondavi, and I live in, and I remember saying, wait, why? She goes, we need you in Baltimore. So it was a great night, absolutely incredible night. A lot of stories about Julia and the work, the people that she'd influenced and helped. Anyway, I could talk about Julia all day long. That same day, Paul Prudhomme was working in a studio next door, filming a commercial. Chef Paul, the dude who created blackened foods, right? I mean, man could go, right? Anyway, so I meet Chef Paul serving the same dish. Oh, by the way, last part, Julia loved the dish. So I asked her assistant, the person, I said, did she really like it, or she just saying it to be kind? She said, Curtis, if Julia didn't like it, she would tell you, then she'd tell you how to fix it. That's it, y'all. We don't have to put people down. We can lift them up and help them prepare better food. So I don't really like to criticize. So when I go to a restaurant, I'm never there to critique it unless I'm there as a consultant, right? So I go to restaurants and I look for the things I love, not the things I don't like. Anyway, I have this rule, give everything at least 2 chances. If they're good, I want to be good the next time. If they're not so good, maybe next time they'll improve. How do you like that for work? Anyway, so Chef Paul, meet him, have a great conversation, and don't see him again for a couple of years. I'm doing Booking the Cook in Philadelphia, and Chef is there. He's on before me. And this is when the Food Network was getting started, and people really, and people were like, well, we got to get Chef Paul out so Curtis can come on. And I said, how dare you? That man, we're standing on his shoulders. Those of us in the culinary world, we stand on people like Julia Child, Paul Prudhomme, and Emeril Lagasse, who is, the BAM guy, right? I mean, Emeril and I, we started at the same time with Food Network down in Nashville, Tennessee. And Emeril is like the Tiger Woods of the culinary business, right? I mean, Julia is like Jack Nicholson and Palmer, right? Arnold Palmer. But Emeril's a guy that helped us all really start to become celebrity chefs. So if anyone talks bad about Emeril, you got to take me on. I'm nonviolent. I don't believe in fighting. Okay, so let's go to the next video. This is our recipe of the day, right? Emma, is this our Wellington?
Yep, it sure is. And someone had one question that I can actually answer really quick before we move on, which was just, will I be able to watch this recording after the presentation is over today? And the answer is yes. We will be posting a recording in the days following the webinar. So keep your eyes out for that on the Sunrise Senior Living website. And then here we go with our next video.
Now this is in the Wellington style. Now this right here is not the beef tenderloin. This is a chuck tenderloin, because what we're doing today is in the Wellington style. Now this is what a Chateaubriand, $20.12 I paid at the market early this morning. So we're going to prep this by mushrooms. We're grinding the mushroom in this little bitty a grinder that I picked up, I think on Amazon for like $10 or something. It's a great way to prepare our mushrooms. What we're doing here, we're not cooking the mushrooms, we're just removing the liquid. We're going to reduce this. I put the lid on, that helps to sweat them quickly. You see all that moisture inside the pan there? So we want to let as much of that liquid cook out as possible. They don't need to be dried out, but just get as much of that liquid out. Can you hold it for a second there, Emma? Now, when I talk about those mushrooms, what I want you to do, like I said, remove the liquid, then I pushed them to the back so they could cool down, because we'll be working with them a little later on. Now, go ahead and start it back up, Emma. Thank you. Now, that's that chuck. We're going to cut it, this little piece. We'll talk about that a little later. Now, I'm slicing this up. And all of this, we can make Wellingtons out of each cut here. We're going to season it, salt and pepper. Now, here's that cut, the end there. And this is the Chateaubriand from that center cut of the loin. I want you to look at those. They look very similar on camera. Let's pause it again, Emma. On the right there is the Chateaubriand. That's what the true beef Wellington is made from. It's an expensive cut of meat. And, you normally get a longer piece that's maybe 2 to 3, maybe 4 pounds. And right now in the market, that would cost you about $120. You saw that one little piece we had there. I think it's like half a pound, and that costs $20.12. On the left is that piece from that chuck loin. Now take a look at that. Don't get me wrong. I don't want anyone to misunderstand what I'm saying here. That piece of meat on the right is like, wow, it's like butter. It's such a great cut of meat. So I always say to folks, let your budget dictate. Don't go by what I say. I have Gustav knives that cost like $2,000. I couldn't buy those when I was a young man, right? So let's not. I don't want you to be culinary shamed if your budget doesn't allow you to have Chateaubriand. On the right is this chuck, and I'm going to share with you ways of making that more tender. Okay. One thing we can do is freeze it. Okay. Just when you freeze meat, there's a chemical process. You see those little streaks in the middle, those little in more expensive cuts, it's called marbling. Truth is, that's just fat. Okay. Those things in the corpuscles, when you freeze it, helps to break them down, and it makes the meat more tender. Okay. Go ahead and roll it, Emma. We're a pretty good team. And we're going to bring it up for a close-up now. Freeze again if you can. You see on the right, that marbling, and on the left, the marbling on the right is a little thicker, right? That part of the loin comes from part of the animal that it's not load-bearing, okay? So that gets really soft. The part on the right, that's that chuck loin, there's a little more muscle in there, right? Okay, roll it, Emma. You are such a good, director. Now, like I said, to make that more tender, we can freeze it. You can also use things like pineapple, papaya. All those are natural meat tenderizers, and they help to soften that meat up. Look at that. You really can't tell the difference. What we're going to do here is sear that. After we season it, it's going to sear each side for about 30 seconds. I didn't use my stopwatch this time. So we're going to sear it. And what that does is it holds the juices in, helps us to hold the juices in. Again, we're going to put that on the side. I've got my mustard, and I use Coleman's, which is a British mustard. Truth be told, I love my Dijon mustard. So Dijon mustard, I like because the British mustard is wonderful. It just has a little more bite, I think, than the Grey Poupon or the mustard from France, the Dijon mustard. Okay, you can roll it. Now here's our puff pastry. We got our puff pastry ready here. And I was telling Emma yesterday during our tech talk that I had not made beef Wellington in maybe 12 or 15 years. However, and I hadn't worked with puff pastry, and I forget how much I love working with puff pastry. See how we just roll that out? Rochelle, if you're online and you can give us tips on working with puff pastry, please type them in there for everyone. Rochelle is an incredible pastry chef. So what we did is we added Italian ham, prosciutto. I'll never forget the first time I tried prosciutto. I was working at Balducci's, and I said to Andy, I said, "This tastes like what my granddad used to make." He started laughing, and he says, "Is your granddad from the country?" Oh, yes, yes, Andy. He goes, "Yeah, because that's all this is country ham, right?" Those of you in Virginia, you know what I'm talking about, nice country ham. My dad would take us on these weekend warrior trips, he called them. However, warrior being seeing things. My mom and dad were great. They exposed us to so much. And that's one of the things that as a grandparent, I look forward to sharing with my little grandson, G.O. His name is Graham Otto Aikens. The whole idea of sharing with him things that that I share with his dad and his uncle and his aunt, Catherine. So the prosciutto's in the base, then the mushrooms, right? And as I was saying earlier, I hadn't made this dish in a long time, so I'm really working on my technique. And I got to tell y'all, I've fallen back in love with working with not only Chateaubriand, but also the puff pastry. All right, you can roll it, Emma. We're gonna put that base down, and what I want you to do is do a roulade. A little, that's a little bit of egg wash to hold that pastry dough in place. Onto a baking tin. Now that's that expensive cut. Let's roll out and do the less expensive cut. And again, I want you to remember, whatever you're doing, the more you do it, the easier it gets and the better at it you become, okay? You should have seen the first one I did about 3 weeks ago. Now we're gonna go in the oven. I've got it at 400 degrees, 400, you missed that. Now my oven runs a little hot, so I always preheat my oven or heat my oven until it reaches 450, then I lower it before I put things in. I think I show you the time now. Now this is the chicken in the Wellington style. Remember, this is a key tip when it comes to chicken. It needs to reach an internal temperature of 165 before it's done. And you want to let that hold that temperature for 3 to 4 minutes. So that was my old Wellington. That was a shot I should have done. We're checking the temperature, internal temp 148, so that was good to go. We know that's done. I'm gonna let it rest for about 10 minutes before we slice it. There, you see it's resting there because it continues to cook, right? We're gonna slice it, and there we go. That's that other Wellington. Look at that, boom. And remember, chicken needs to reach an internal temperature of 165 and hold it. There we go. What do you all think about this so far? Any comments about what we're doing for you? Are you enjoying this as much as I am enjoying bringing it to you?
We have a couple questions, Curtis, if you want to do those right now.
Yes, would love it.
So this one's going back actually just one step back to the last recipe you shared. Are all tomatoes acidic, or does roasting them reduce the acidity? Too much acid is tough for seniors.
I totally agree. That's what I was saying earlier. They get sweeter. And what we want to do, anything, and again, seniors, when we want to counteract acid, one way you do that with something sweet. So when we roast the tomatoes, they do become sweeter. As far as the acid dropping, not sure. I need to ask one of my dietitian friends or a chemist for that. There's a gentleman that I'm doing some work with. He calls himself, well, he's known as the soil sommelier. Stephen Andrews, Dr. Stephen Andrews over from UC Berkeley. He and I are going to do a project in my yard. We're going to build a composter in my yard. I love gardening, y'all. I've been gardening all my life. I'll never forget, as a kid, my granddaddy, my mom's dad, Granddaddy Curtis, up in North Georgia, in Adairsville, Georgia, he would sit me at the corner of the garden and he wouldn't let me work in it. And I always wondered why. And he thought, well, I don't want you growing up and have to dig in the dirt. Now, my granddaddy loved this dude, great role model. He and all the Aikens and Curtis men in my life. He died on my birthday, my 12th birthday, my granddad, Granddaddy Curtis. I love him so much. And now it's like when I'm in my garden, it's almost like I'm channeling him. And Stephen Andrews, Dr. Andrews over from UC Berkeley, is one of these men. He is so passionate about the soil that we stand on. He came to give us a presentation. He talked, and I will never call the stuff we stand on dirt anymore. Dirt is what comes out of the vacuum cleaner. Soil is a living entity, right? I mean, there's so much going on in our soil. So I'm going to ask him about the acid, and also the guy at Auburn University I did some work with years ago. I think it was 2008. There was it was called the Year of the Tomato in Alabama, and the professor of tomatoes, Dr. Tomato, talked so much. So those are two people I will check into. And if you'll send me that question, or I'll have the video, I will write back and I'll let everyone know what the answer from the doctors are about the acid content reducing during the roasting process. Was there another question, Emma?
Awesome. Yep, we have a couple more questions and some comments. So let's see. Is there a replacement that you would suggest for mushrooms in that recipe if there's an allergy to mushrooms?
Yes. Two suggestions. One, leave them out. Remember, as we said, as Julia shared with me, and I'm sharing with you, recipes are starting points. If there's something you can't eat, most definitely leave them out. What would I substitute in place of mushrooms? Okay, I want you to think about vegetables, and it's all about adding. What we do by adding things to dishes is we're changing or upgrading that flavor profile. Okay, so what would I use in place of mushroom? I'm thinking. Are you okay with tofu? Right, tofu. You can take tofu, chop it up, and do the same kind of thing. Right, you can flavor it by adding garlic. You can add herbs to that, right? So a really fine diced tofu. In fact, there's a show we did for the Food Network years ago, and I'll try to post that for you, where I go to a tofu factory and we talk about the different types of tofu and how they work. Tofu is just simply made from soybean, okay? So if you can use that, go for it. Now, also other vegetables. I love zucchini and yellow squash. Remember though, we talked about taking the moisture out of those mushrooms. What I would do is make a confetti. I dice them up really fine so they saute down. You can use your food processor, the same thing I did, right? Now get a lot of that liquid out so when you do your roulade, it won't get mushy. Okay? Hope that answers. If that's not a good enough answer, send me a question to the website, chef@curtisaikens.net, and I'll send you more suggestions of that. Any more questions, comments, Emma?
Thank you, Curtis. Yes, so we had 2 comments in here from Kathy and Rochelle saying that they're learning so much. This is fantastic, and thank you. And then Rochelle shared a tip about the puff pastry.
My sister. Oh, sorry.
It's important to keep the puff pastry well chilled before rolling it out. Need to work with it pretty quickly or it'll become difficult to handle. That's a great tip.
All right, Rochelle, you got to come on the show with me soon. We got to do some more. We got to do some more tips. All right. Anything else?
Nope, that's it for right now.
Ooh, now this next recipe, before we get there, so I've given the tip on look at it. I given the tip on feeling it. Ooh, the next tip is to smell your fresh fruits and vegetables. What do you say? Yes, use your nose, okay? This is one of those tips. Again, Joe Carcione, I go right back. Oh, I got to share with you all. In my career, I mean, I'm like the Forrest Gump of food. Okay, how Forrest Gump bumped into everybody. That's me, right? I mean, it's like years ago, I'm living in New York, and we go into Mickey Mantle's restaurant. This is back in the day when the Mick was still alive, right? So I walk in and I got this book under my shoulder, and I hear someone go, "Hey, kid, what do you think of that book?" And I turn to my right, and there's Mickey Mantle. I end up sitting there with Mickey Mantle for like 3 hours, right? And I get to this point to where he says, "Okay, you've heard me talk. What would you like to know from me, kid?" And I said, "Mr. Mantle." He goes, "Call me Mick." I'm like, whoa. So I'm sitting here with number 7, right? The real original number 7, and he's saying, call him Mick. So I asked him, I said, "Mick, what were you thinking about when you went to the batter's box?" Because now Mickey Mantle was like, he was like Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Mickey Mantle, right? Joe DiMaggio, these guys. However, Mick hit from both sides of the plate, right? So he says, when I went to the plate, it's all situational, right? I go up there, and if there's nobody on, Curtis, I've got a hitting zone about that wide. He actually did his hands like this. And I'm thinking, oh my God. He said, if the ball was in that zone, it was gone. But remember, hitting, just like life, is situational. We've got to be able to adapt. He says, now, I could have been a really good baseball player if I just stayed in that zone. However, if you want to be great, you've got to expand your zone. In other words, you got to be able to fight off those bad pitches. We've got to be able to fight out these ailments that happen to these bodies as we mature, because we don't get old, right? We're like fine wines. The more years on us, the better we are. So I use that as a metaphor for me, right? That's why I like to take yoga. That's why I do my walks. That's why we've got to exercise our brain. So Mickey Mantle says, like, if there's a man on, if we're behind, if the Yankees were behind and I'm coming to the plate and I know I got a man on second and there's 2 outs, it says I've got to really protect that plate. So if there's any chance that the umpire's been calling balls and strikes outside of that zone, I've got to protect that zone so I get a pitch that I can drive. So I learned so much in my time with Mickey Mantle. So the whole thing about and I share this with a lot of my players as I coach them, if you want to be great, you got to get out of your comfort zone. All right, y'all? Moms, dads, grandmas, grandpas, whoever's watching this show, if you're comfortable, you're not learning. Okay. And we talk about learning. I like to share the fact that learning is lifelong. I've had some incredible mentors and teachers, two people that touched me most in my life, other than my family, Steve and Jenny Seibel. They're the people that taught me to read. All the books you see around here, y'all, 10% of my royalties, I go back to reading programs because I didn't learn to read till I was 26 years old. I got into this food world to create a platform so I could speak out for reading. So I love volunteering. I've spoken with kids all across the world. In fact, you know, I was in a textbook. And so I get these letters occasionally on my YouTube channel in particular, because kids are into that stuff, right? So I get letters from China, from Africa, from all across America, kids saying, tell us what it was like when you couldn't read. And here's the easiest analogy, is that it's like that blank screen I'm looking at, or a dark room, and reading are the lights coming on. And it's incredible. So if you got some spare time, I'm not telling you to do this, I'm just sharing with you the joy of giving back. You know, reach out to a reading program. I'll never forget getting to meet Ruth, who started Literacy Volunteers of America. And that's one of that work is one of the first things that took me to the White House. I cooked for Mrs. Bush, George Bush Sr.'s wife, and Barbara Bush. I never forget, we're at the White House, there's a reception there, and I'm in line to meet the president, and I hear Miss Bush saying, Bubba, that's Curtis, he's my hero. And I'm like, first off, who's Bubba? But I realized she was talking to her husband, and then I'm thinking, First Lady calling me her hero? Wow. So that's another highlight in my career. And then I got to cook with Miss Obama at the White House. I'll never forget, I was at the White House on my brother Jeffrey's birthday, October 14th. We lost Jeffrey to cancer about 8 years ago. And I'm standing outside the White House thinking about Jeff, and you know, he and my dad, and they would have loved to have been there. So when I meet Ms. Obama, I'll never forget, she came out and gave me this hug, and I almost fell over. I'm not kidding you. I was like, I grabbed the wall. Talking about highlights of a man's career, getting to meet several first ladies. Miss Clinton was fabulous. Anyway,